Overheard my neighbor's secret affair through a scanner in the 80s, it changed how I view trust forever. Hey everyone. I've been lurking on a few subreddits for a while, and something I read the other day dredged up a memory I haven't fully processed, even after all these years. It's one of those things that fundamentally changed how I look at people, at relationships, at trust. It happened back in the late 1980s. I was a teenager then, probably around 15 or 16, completely obsessed with anything electronic. My dad, bless his heart, encouraged my tinkering. He wasn't an engineer or anything, he sold insurance, but he loved seeing me figure things out. My sanctuary was the garage, a chaotic landscape of wires, circuit boards, half-finished projects, and the smell of solder. One summer, I saved up enough money from my paper route and mowing lawns to buy a used radio scanner from a stall at the local flea market. It wasn't a top-of-the-line model, more like something that had seen better days, a big boxy thing with a telescopic antenna that wobbled. But to me, it was a magic portal. I'd spend hours slowly turning the dial, listening to police dispatches, fire crews, ambulance calls, and even the occasional chatter from amateur radio operators. It felt like I had a secret window into the unseen workings of my sleepy suburban town, Elm Creek. Most of it was mundane: traffic stops, Mr. Henderson's cat stuck up a tree again, minor fender benders. Sometimes, if I was lucky, I'd catch snippets of conversation from cordless phones. Back then, a lot of cordless phones operated on frequencies that these older scanners could easily pick up. It felt a bit like eavesdropping, sure, but mostly it was just garbled nonsense or people talking about what to have for dinner. Nothing juicy, nothing that ever stuck with me. Until that one afternoon. Our house was a typical two-story colonial, and my bedroom window faced the backyards of several houses on the next street over. One of those houses belonged to the Harringtons. Mr. and Mrs. Harrington. I didn't know them well, just the usual neighborly nods. He, Arthur Harrington if I remember correctly, was a man in his late 30s or early 40s, always seemed to be washing his car on Saturdays, a shiny Ford sedan. He had that kind of easy, confident smile that many people probably found charming. Mrs. Harrington, Sarah, was quieter. I'd see her gardening mostly, tending to her roses with a diligence that I, a restless teenager, couldn't fathom. She had a kind face, often wore an apron, and seemed gentle. They looked, from the outside, like any other married couple on our street. Normal. Stable. Maybe even happy. They didn't have kids, which made their house quieter than most. Sometimes I'd see them sitting on their porch in the evenings, him reading the paper, her knitting. An idyllic picture, really. It was a hot, listless August day. School was still out, and the kind of humid boredom had set in where the cicadas sounded angrier than usual. I was up in my room, scanner on, just lazily cruising through the frequencies. The usual emergency service chatter was slow. I nudged the dial a bit, venturing into the range where cordless phones sometimes popped up. Static, then a click, and then a man's voice. Clear as a bell. "No, she's busy." Making herself useful for a change, the voice said, followed by a low, throaty chuckle. It was smooth, a little deep, with an amused tone. I almost scrolled past it. Just another random snippet. But something made me pause. Maybe it was the clarity. Then, a woman's laugh, higher pitched, a little conspiratorial. "Oh, you're terrible, darling." "Am I?" the man's voice replied, still laced with that same amusement. "She's vacuuming. Right now. I can see her through the kitchen window. Bent over, little apron on, the whole 9 yards. Looks like a 50s housewife. Bless her cotton socks." He didn't sound like he was blessing anything. There was a distinct sneer under the words. My heart began to thud a little. There was an intimacy in their tones, but also a cruelty in his that felt off. I glanced out my window, almost instinctively. My line of sight to the Harringtons' kitchen window was partially obscured by a large oak tree, but I could see a section of it. And there, moving back and forth, was a figure. It was Mrs. Harrington. She was vacuuming. She had a small, floral apron on. "Is she wearing that ridiculous frilly one you hate?" the woman on the phone asked, her voice dripping with shared amusement. "The very same," he confirmed, and they both laughed again. It wasn't a kind laugh. It was the laugh of people sharing a private, nasty joke at someone else's expense. "She thinks I find it quaint. Little does she know." He lowered his voice a fraction. "So, are you still thinking about that little place by the lake for next weekend?" My stomach churned. This wasn't just some random conversation. The description of the woman vacuuming, the apron, it was too specific. I knew, with a sickening certainty, that the male voice belonged to Mr. Harrington. He was on his cordless phone, inside his house, talking to another woman while his wife was right there, completely oblivious. I sat frozen, the scanner pressed to my ear, feeling like I'd stumbled into a place I had no right to be. It was like peeling back the wallpaper in a seemingly normal house and finding rot and termites underneath. "Absolutely, my love," the woman cooed back. "Just imagine, you, me, the water, no vacuum cleaners in sight." "Sounds like heaven, Angel," Mr. Harrington said. The endearment, Angel, sounded so natural, so practiced. But it was directed at this other woman, while his wife was just a few feet away. He then said something that seared itself into my brain. "Yeah, she just asked me if I wanted a lemonade." Can you believe it? Oblivious. It's almost cute. Like a puppy. He used a pet name for his wife then, something common, like sweetheart or honey, but it was dripping with such condescension, such utter disregard, it felt like a physical blow. He called her sweetheart and then, in the same breath, with the same casual tone, continued his illicit conversation with his mistress, detailing their weekend plans. The casual cruelty was what got me. The sheer, unadulterated ease with which he mocked her, laughed at her with his mistress, all while watching her. He was looking at his wife, the woman he'd presumably made vows to, and seeing her as an object of ridicule, a source of amusement for him and his lover. He was using her pet names, terms of endearment, while simultaneously tearing her down to a stranger on the phone. The betrayal wasn't just the affair itself. It was the delight he seemed to take in the deception, the way he performed his role as a husband while his mind and heart were clearly elsewhere, engaged in a secret life that made a mockery of his marriage. I remember feeling a strange mix of emotions. Nausea, definitely. Anger, a hot, helpless kind. And a profound sense of sadness for Mrs. Harrington, who was at that very moment probably thinking she was doing something nice for her husband, offering him a lemonade, completely unaware of the poison being spoken about her. The image of her, diligently cleaning, while he stood there, perhaps even smiling at her, all the while on the phone with another woman, laughing at her expense, it was horrifying. It was the casualness of it all that was the most chilling. This wasn't a heated argument or a moment of weakness. This sounded practiced, routine. This was his life. I listened for a few more minutes, feeling sicker with each exchanged word. They talked about meeting up later in the week, about a gift he'd bought for the mistress, about how careful they had to be. Every word was a fresh stab of betrayal, not to me, but to Mrs. Harrington, and by extension, to the very idea of what a marriage was supposed to be. I felt like an unwilling accomplice, a silent witness to a crime of the heart. Then, I couldn't take it anymore. I abruptly switched off the scanner, my hand trembling. The silence in my room felt deafening. The ordinary sounds from outside, a dog barking, kids playing down the street, seemed jarringly normal compared to the ugliness I'd just been privy to. I looked out the window again. Mrs. Harrington had finished vacuuming. She was now wiping down the kitchen counter. She paused, looked out her own window for a moment, a small, almost wistful smile on her face. Maybe she was looking forward to that lemonade with her husband. The thought made me want to throw up. For the rest of that day, I was a wreck. I couldn't concentrate on anything. The sound of Mr. Harrington's voice, his laughter, kept replaying in my head. Every time I heard a phone ring, my stomach would clench. I avoided looking out my window towards their house. When I did catch a glimpse of Mr. Harrington later that evening, watering his lawn with a look of utter normalcy on his face, a cold wave of revulsion washed over me. How could someone be so duplicitous? How could they live that lie, day in and day out, with such apparent ease? I thought about telling someone. My parents? What would I say? I was eavesdropping on the Harringtons' phone calls and Mr. Harrington is having an affair. It sounded juvenile, like a tattletale, and besides, what could they do? Confront him? That would just expose my snooping and potentially cause a massive neighborhood drama, with me at the center. And what about Mrs. Harrington? Would knowing the truth, delivered by a teenage neighbor who'd been listening in on her private life, actually help her? Or would it just add another layer of humiliation and pain? The dilemma tortured me. I felt the weight of this horrible secret, but I also felt utterly powerless. I was just a kid. What could I possibly do that wouldn't make things worse? So, I said nothing. I kept the secret locked inside, a heavy stone in my gut. But it changed things. Every time I saw Mr. Harrington from then on, all I could see was the deceit, hear that mocking laugh. Every time I saw Mrs. Harrington, with her gentle smile and her gardening gloves, I felt a pang of pity and a strange sort of guilt, as if my silence made me complicit. Their seemingly peaceful suburban life was a facade, and I was one of the few who knew. The incident with the scanner didn't turn me off electronics. If anything, my fascination with how things worked, and sometimes how they could be misused, deepened. But it did something more profound. It planted a seed of cynicism in me, a wariness about taking people and situations at face value. It was my first real, visceral understanding that appearances could be devastatingly deceptive. That smiles could hide cruelty, and that the ordinary surfaces of life could conceal deep, painful betrayals. Over the next few years, I saw the Harringtons now and then. They continued to live in their house, to wash their car, to tend their garden. From the outside, nothing changed. I never knew if Mrs. Harrington ever found out. They eventually moved away a few years later, when I was in college. I remember feeling a strange sense of relief when their house went up for sale. But the impact of that overheard conversation lingered. It wasn't just about the Harringtons anymore. It was about the realization of the human capacity for casual cruelty, for profound betrayal cloaked in normalcy. It made me vow to myself, in a way that only a deeply affected teenager can, that I would never, ever be the cause of that kind of pain for someone else. I would never be a Mr. Harrington. The idea of laughing with one person at the expense of another, especially someone who trusted me, who was vulnerable to me, became abhorrent. That day, listening to that scanner, a part of my innocence died. It was replaced by a harder, more cautious understanding of the world. It taught me that trust, once broken, especially in such a callous way, might leave scars that never fully fade. And it made me incredibly sensitive to the nuances of how people treated each other, always listening for the unspoken, for the truth beneath the surface. It was a heavy lesson for a 15-year-old, delivered through the crackle of a cheap radio scanner on a hot summer afternoon. And it's a lesson that has stayed with me, shaping my interactions and my view of trust, for my entire life. I often wonder about Mrs. Harrington, and hope that somehow, she eventually found happiness and honesty. As for Mr. Harrington, I hope he, at some point, understood the gravity of his casual cruelty. But mostly, I just remember the vow I made, and try my best to live by it. Update 2. Wow. Okay, so I posted that story a while back, and honestly, I didn't expect the kind of response it got. So many of you shared similar experiences, either being on the receiving end of something like that, or witnessing it, or even grappling with your own mistakes. It was a lot. But also kind of cathartic to know I wasn't the only one who had an experience like this lodge itself so deeply in their psyche. Reading your comments and messages made me reflect even more on the long-term ripples of that afternoon with the scanner. It's funny how a single, relatively brief event from your teens can cast such a long shadow. For years after that incident, I found myself hypervigilant in my own relationships. Not in a paranoid, accusatory way, I hope, but more in an observant way. I'd listen very closely to how people talked about others, especially those not present. Casual unkindness, even in jest, became a massive red flag for me. If a date was rude to a waiter at Starbucks, or if a friend constantly made belittling jokes about their partner, a little alarm bell would go off in my head, a faint echo of Mr. Harrington's smug laughter. It wasn't that I expected perfection, nobody's perfect. But I developed a very low tolerance for what I perceived as duplicity or a lack of basic respect and empathy in how people treated those supposedly close to them. My early romantic relationships were definitely affected. I think I was probably a bit too guarded, too quick to analyze every word and gesture for hidden meanings. I remember one girlfriend, Lisa, a really sweet person, telling me I sometimes seemed like I was waiting for the other shoe to drop. And she was right. That image of Mrs. Harrington, blissfully unaware while her world was being mocked, made me terrified of being that person, of being made a fool of. It took a conscious effort, and a few very patient partners, for me to learn to trust more openly, to understand that not everyone was a Mr. Harrington in waiting. I had to learn that my past experience was my burden to manage, not a pre-written script for every new person I met. It also profoundly shaped my understanding of loyalty. That vow I made as a teenager, to never be the source of such pain, became a cornerstone of how I tried to live. It wasn't just about romantic fidelity, though that was certainly part of it. It extended to friendships, to professional conduct, even to how I spoke about casual acquaintances. The idea of betraying someone's trust, of making them feel small or ridiculed behind their back, felt like a cardinal sin. There were times, especially in my 20s, when I saw friends engaging in that kind of behavior, gossiping maliciously, playing people off against each other. And while I wasn't always brave enough to call it out directly back then, it always created a distance. I found myself gravitating towards people who were straightforward, who valued integrity, even if they were a bit rough around the edges. Authenticity became far more important to me than polished charm, because I'd seen firsthand how charm could be a weapon. The memory of Mr. Harrington's casual cruelty also, paradoxically, fostered a deep sense of empathy in me. Because I'd witnessed that raw, unvarnished moment of betrayal, I felt I had a glimpse into the kind of pain it could inflict. It made me more sensitive to the emotional states of people around me. If a friend seemed down, or if a colleague was unusually quiet, I'd be more inclined to reach out, to check if they were okay. Not in an intrusive way, but just to offer a moment of connection. I think, subconsciously, I was always trying to counteract that feeling of isolation Mrs. Harrington must have experienced, even if she wasn't aware of the full extent of her husband's deceit at that moment. The thought of someone feeling alone in their pain, while the person causing it was laughing, just felt unbearable. I did tell one person about the scanner incident, many years later. My wife, Clara. We'd been married for about 5 years, and we were having one of those late-night conversations where you bare your souls. I told her the whole story, how it had made me wary, how it had shaped my views on trust. She listened patiently, and when I was done, she just held my hand and said, "That explains a lot about why you're so fiercely protective of the people you love, and why honesty is so non-negotiable for you." It was a moment of profound understanding. She didn't dismiss it as just a teenage memory, she saw how it had woven itself into the fabric of who I am. Her acceptance, her understanding, was incredibly healing. It helped me to finally frame that memory not just as a source of cynicism, but as a catalyst for some of the better parts of my character, my loyalty, my empathy, my commitment to being a trustworthy person. I never found out what happened to the Harringtons after they moved. Elm Creek wasn't a tiny village, but it wasn't a metropolis either. News sometimes traveled. But they just sort of vanished from my orbit. Part of me, for a long time, hoped Mrs. Harrington had discovered the truth and found a better life. Another, more cynical part of me, sometimes wondered if they just continued their charade in a new town, with new neighbors. I'll never know. And in a way, their specific fate isn't the point of the story for me anymore. They were the unwilling actors in a drama that taught me a crucial life lesson. Even now, decades later, when I think about trust, I often picture Mrs. Harrington by her kitchen window. That image is a permanent fixture in my mind. It's a reminder of the vulnerability that comes with loving someone, with opening your life to them. And it's a reminder of the profound responsibility that comes with being on the receiving end of that trust. Mr. Harrington didn't just betray his wife, he desecrated something sacred. He took her trust and her affection and he trampled on them with a laugh. Today, I'm in my 50s. My kids are grown. Clara and I have built a life based on the very things that Mr. Harrington so casually discarded: honesty, respect, and a deep, abiding trust that we've both worked hard to earn and maintain. There have been ups and downs, of course, no long-term relationship is without its challenges. But the foundation has always been solid, built on the lessons learned from experiences like the one with the scanner, and many others along the way. The world is still full of Mr. Harringtons. You see them in the news, in stories people share, sometimes even, unfortunately, in your own life. Deception and betrayal are part of the human condition, I suppose. But I also know there are countless Mrs. Harringtons, good, trusting souls who deserve honesty and kindness. And there are people who, like me, carry the scars of witnessed betrayals, and who strive every day to be better, to be worthy of the trust placed in them. That old, wobbly scanner is long gone. I think it probably ended up in a landfill somewhere, or maybe sold for parts. But its legacy, for me, is indelible. It didn't just pick up radio waves, it tuned me into a fundamental truth about human nature, about the delicate, precious, and often painful nature of trust. It taught me that true connection isn't built on polished exteriors or sweet nothings whispered over the phone, it's built on the hard, consistent work of being decent, of being honest, even when no one is listening. Especially when no one is listening. And it reinforced a simple, yet profound principle that guides me to this day: treat people's hearts with care, because you never know how deeply your actions, or your words, can resonate. Thanks for reading, and for sharing your own stories. It helps. It really does. What do you think? Tell us in the comments. Like the video and hit the subscribe button for more Reddit stories.